And welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. And joining me here today in the studio is Executive Director Christine Hewitt from FCD Prevention Works. And also joining me today in the studio is Desiree Vasquez. She's also from the FCD Works. Ladies, welcome to Living in the 21st Century.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Pleasure to
having
be
us.
here.
Thank you. So we are here to discuss substance abuse and among young people, and more importantly, how you develop preventative measures and solutions from their getting involved in illegal substance or whatever the case may be. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So FCD Prevention Works is a prevention organization. We're in our 41st year of facilitating conversation and dialogue around prevention education. We're in 69 countries, 41 states across the United States of America, and we're really the thought leader for prevention education. What FCD holds, and Desiree will certainly comment on this, but what FCD holds is that when we deal with adolescents, we have an opportunity to have conversation and dialogue around keeping them healthy and them making healthy decisions and choices for a long period of time. And so FCD goes into school communities and works with all of the stakeholders in a school community: students, faculty, parents, administrators, coaches, advisors, to learn prevention language and start to set a culture or a climate of prevention in that school community. So that's kind of essentially what we do. And Desiree, please feel free to add to that. Or
Yeah.
Sure.
So we find that prevention is a climate, as Kirsten was saying, not a program. So it's not a one-time inoculation and kids are set. And these are conversations, environments, risk and protective factors we need to address over and over and over again. So what we do when we collaborate with the communities that we work with to keep healthy kids healthy is we're going to nurture the protections that are already in their environment. We're going to reduce some of the risks. And if there are unhealthy behaviors already present that may either be a part of or lead to alcohol use really early on or other drug use, we intervene on those unhealthy behaviors to stop a progression potentially to addiction or other negative consequences of use.
Okay. I heard you mentioned you develop methods to prevent risk. What kind of methodology do you use that you would inject into your programs as a program manager to prevent kids from getting that far into it?
Well, prevention is a newer science. You know, we've taken a look through the past couple of decades, FCD being a part of the prevention world since 1976, at what is effective at working. And so in a science, you need to test and figure out what's effective, what is not over time. And one of the only evidence-based ways that we, as a part of the research community, have uptaken to prevent alcohol and other drug use is something called the evidence-based social norms approach to prevention.
Okay.
So social norms are what we do, right? How we interact with the world. And young people look to the norms they see on TV or in their communities or in their schools with their friends and families to know what is right and wrong for them. So we find that most young people get the message somewhere along the way that it's typical or normal for alcohol or other drug use to be happening in their age group.
Right.
The reality is actually the opposite of that. And when we started looking at research in colleges and universities that showed healthy information back to college students, that not all of them were binge drinking, that in fact most weren't drinking heavily, what the researchers involved in those studies found is that fewer college students engaged in risky behaviors knowing that they could be part of a healthy majority. So there's researchers took that information down from the college level to the high school level, and now we've incorporated it into our methodology. So when we use the social norms approach to prevention, we have prevention specialists engage whole school communities in conversations and learning where schools discover that most of their kids are healthy, use is atypical for them, and then there's a platform in which to engage students who may be involved in risky decisions in demonstrating that this is abnormal. They can receive help for it, and once they come out onto the other side of that, there's the majority of students not using, and they're healthy social networks to be a part of.
Okay. So Kirsten, tell me, when you had engaged in your organization, bring about your organization, what were your main goals designed to do with the youth today? Not only in terms of curbing the attitude towards drug prevention, but how can you nourish young people today in doing the right thing, staying away from drugs, and making a more healthier contribution to society?
So, so often in previous kind of prevention programming, programs that have kind of gone through the different iterations throughout different decades, what we know is that the majority of them didn't work because they talk at kids. They tell kids what they should or shouldn't do. If there's an adolescent who's told that drugs are bad, they'll kill you, and yet they've smoked marijuana and haven't died, there's going to be a disconnect there, right? They're going to go like, well, I actually smoked, and not only did I not die, I felt good, or I felt high, or I was, I got the effect that I wanted. So FCD stays away from all of that kind of language. Rather, it's about health and wellness, and that's always our platform, not good, bad, right, wrong, moral, immoral, legal, illegal. Those conversations are not nearly as important as how do you engage in healthy behaviors? What is health and wellness for you? What is important about your health and wellness? And how do you protect that? What do you do to nourish that and value that? How do you support your friends in doing that? What is important to you about your friend groups that engages in healthy behaviors or healthy attitudes? How does that make you feel? When a friend is doing something that's less than healthy, how might you navigate that with them? So when you start to open up conversation and dialogue in a classroom with kids, what we find, and I've been all over the world and on every continent talking with kids in all kinds of settings, what we find again and again is that kids want to have these conversations. They're eager to talk about things like this. They want to have an environment in which they can explore and ask questions and debate and have conversation and dialogue. Ultimately, I think if I had to kind of put a frame around it or a word around it, is that kids want to learn to think critically about the decisions they're making around substance, rather than just being told how to think about it or being told how their friends should think about it. When they are active participants in learning to think critically about it, I think they feel very valued and like they are taking ownership of their own health and wellness. What research and data shows us is that over time, when kids are given the climate and the culture in which to have those conversations that foster critical thinking, adolescents will actually advocate for their health. So that's why when we see prevention programs like ours facilitating dialogue and conversation, nourishing and nurturing conversation, we see use decline over time.
Okay. So what are the current prevention programs today, in your opinion, really lacking?
Do you want to speak a little bit to that? Or you start it and I'll pick up.
I think that Kirsten started to get into that when she talked about talking at kids, and also kind of how we make this a syllabus or a curriculum as opposed to the conversation, as opposed to us sitting around a table and really caring about one another, building rapport, building trust, and figuring out why it is that kids might use. More importantly, or just as importantly, why they would maybe choose not to use or why they would see risk in that. So it's about adults kind of opening themselves up and engaging with young people, maybe teenagers or young adults, in such a way that there can be a real conversation. We can discuss what happens when I'm stressed at school and I can't figure out how to study for that test and get the grade I want, and I feel stuck. Where do I go with that moment? What do I do? Those are real concerns that a young person might have. Or I just got broken up with as a young person, or my best friends in middle school are no longer my best friends in high school. Realities that young people are facing, and helping them to navigate situations in which they might be presented with the opportunity to use alcohol or other drugs in these contexts. When adults can provide that context and then respect young people enough to wade through that with them in a setting that is educational, that does provide skills, that does provide accurate context that is appropriate, but it's not the lecture, then that's when we open up. And so that's the lecture format, or the kind of check off the box format of this, is kind of where programs are lacking and where they could go further as a conversation.
And we mentioned teen brain science. What can parents do right now to keep kids healthy? What are the top 3 things you can think about? Either one of you.
Maybe you start.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that parents can do is start the health and wellness conversation early. If an adult starts to talk with an adolescent about substance use at high school level, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, it's never too late, but I think there's already a lot of missed opportunity. If a parent starts way upstream, talking about healthy decisions, stress management, all the skills and tools that adolescents need to develop, then by the time the conversation around actual substance needs to happen, it'll just be a part of the conversation, just a part of the climate and culture of that family, just an expected part of the day. It's not the drug talk or the accusation or the, kind of over hyper focus on the substance. It is simply just another portion of the health and wellness conversation in that family. So I think that's probably the number one thing parents can do, is early. The other thing is, what we say at FCD is, prevention is not one 60-minute conversation, it's 61-minute conversation. So finding opportunity to have dialogue around what's going on in adolescent life, not only as it pertains to substance, but when it pertains to substance specifically, is a great opportunity for prevention. So just for an example, the legalization of marijuana has been really kind of front and center in the news, over the past couple of years. Legalization, decriminalization, all of these kinds of things. Finding out how their adolescents feel about that, think about that, just engaging in dialogue, lots of open-ended questions. That those are actually protective factors. What we know and what research tells us is that when parents are engaged and informed, and they foster an environment where dialogue can happen in safe ways with their adolescents, it is the adult's voice in their life that adolescents hear the longest. And they might look like they ignore their parents. It might seem like they're ignoring their parents, but in their minds, adolescents will go back to, again and again, their parents' value system around substance. So even when parents feel like they want to give up and they don't listen, they only listen to their friends, it's not true. Parents must toe the line and hold the culture and find opportunity to have safe discussion, even though the kids act like they're not paying attention. It's probably, and the only other thing I was going to say is, those are 2 really important things. The only other thing I was going to say is, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier, today's generation is healthier than any generation before. So they are the healthiest adolescent population that we know of since we've been tracking adolescent health and wellness. Parents don't know that. So parents have, and for obvious reason, they have the ability to superimpose their reality onto their adolescents. All kids use, I did it, I got through it, they have to use a part of growing up. Really what we know is the majority of kids are making healthy decisions around substance for for the majority of their adolescent years.
Right.
So parents need to know that. They need to understand that their kids are healthier than they ever were before. And so to be very mindful of superimposing their past reality on their current adolescent and assuming that their kids are using or assuming unhealthy decisions for their children. It's about stopping, taking a break,
Okay.
and having dialogue with their kids
Right.
about health and wellness.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned also that you would have been around the world, and obviously you would have spoken to many kids from different schools
Oh, yeah.
and different places.
Mm-hmm.
From a geographical standpoint, how do you see most kids here in the U.S. Opposed to some other parts of the world that you may would have visited? What do you see in their perception when it comes to whether it's illegal drugs, whether it's alcohol abuse, or any other form of illegal substance? What is there any comparison approach or analysis that you can make any claims on in terms of
American youth
Yes.
versus other. Do you
Yeah.
want to speak a little bit?
Sure.
Desiree probably has more data on that.
So we have a survey. It's
Right.
one of our programs called the FCD Student Attitudes and Behavior Survey.
Right.
And it's been administered with tens of thousands of students across years 2004, 2005, all the way up till the present academic year.
Okay.
And so we do see some slight differences between teenagers in different places. Again, we don't come at this issue from
Right.
anything but a health perspective, but students across the world might take their culture into account. So in some places where the laws say this drug is prohibited, but this drug is absolutely okay, and it's flipped somewhere else in the world, students might have risk perceptions that one is healthier than the other or more dangerous than the other based on that. So we see a little bit more of that in terms of the United States and the marijuana conversation. If we look at Latin America, where marijuana use in
Right.
some communities, cultures, students with a different religion, for instance, may be a little bit different there. Use may be a little bit less acceptable.
Right.
So we look at that, but what we find really across the world is that kids are kids are kids. And there are a couple things that are really prevalent and that they might not want us to know as adults. One is that they really don't want to disappoint us as adults, especially their parents. So Kirsten says, again, don't give away your power as a parent to say the rules, enforce the rules, to say that you're not okay with your young person using alcohol, nicotine, marijuana. These are lines that your teenager, moving from the concrete as a little
Right.
kid to the abstract as an adult, needs to hear from you as someone that they value and as someone that they're looking to provide that boundary, to provide that safe space for them through this clear communication. So kids all across the world are looking to excel in life. They're looking to thrive. They're looking to the adults in their life for support and guidance, and that's really the universal. So we need to get educated and start talking ourselves as adults so that we can provide those safe spaces and that support for kids.
Okay. Well, I found that there are a lot of parents out there who engage in drinking, be it smoking or doing some other form of illegal drugs, and they have kids. They have kids. How can they set a standard for those kids when they are involved in the same thing? Would it not be more difficult if that child doesn't have a brain on its own to say, well, you know what, I'm not going down this same road that my mother or father is going. I'm going to do much better than they. What do you see from this standpoint?
Yeah, I think, obviously the kids they don't own their own system. They live within their parent system. So
Right.
to that end, yeah, that's a risk factor for sure. In terms of use, and Desiree will comment on this as well, but in terms of use, a teenage brain, a developing adolescent brain, is far more vulnerable to substance misuse disorders and addiction than an adult brain. So the conversation really isn't no, never use, never. That's not really the conversation. The conversation is, because you're young and developing, because your brain is malleable, flexible, pliable, that means it's more vulnerable. It's making connections and pathways that that adolescent will need to navigate life successfully for the rest of his or her
Right.
life. When you put substance in there, in any measure, there's risk. All use equals risk. The more substance you put in there, the more consistently, the higher the risk. The younger you do that, exponentially higher the risk. So that's what parents, whether parents choose to use or not, and role model, every family has their own dynamic that they have to work through, but parents need to know that because an adolescent's brain is more vulnerable than an adult brain, delayed use is always preferable. Delaying use of any substance while their brains are forming is always preferable.
So therefore, then I think it would be advisable that parents, there should be some form of educational programs directed at parents that they can see things from a different standpoint when it comes to their children. Here's a situation that you're saying that parents need to know that kids' brains are malleable and they're still in that format, still trying to be nourished. Then what would be your advice towards those parents that they can bring across the right dialogue towards their children?
So the advice is to support health and wellness, and when kids push that boundary, age of initiation in adolescence, later adolescence, 15, 16, 17, when kids push that boundary, it's really the parents, the onus is on the parents, the responsibility is on the parent to push the boundary back and toe the line of health and wellness, even though the child pushes against it. Before, and addiction medicine has come a long way in the past 25 years. We have brain scans and imaging now. We didn't have that years and years ago. We could only tell the effects of substance abuse on an adolescent because of the symptoms, because of how it played out.
Yes.
Today, we have brain imaging, and we can see the effects of substance use. And every human body is different, so therefore every risk is different. That's why we say all use equals risk. We don't know whose chemistry is exceedingly vulnerable and some might be a little bit more or less vulnerable. So we don't exactly know because human beings are individuals. So it's the parent, the advice is it's the parent's job to toe, like Desiree was saying, set the boundaries and toe the line and hold the culture of health and wellness even when kids push against that line.
We know there are a lot of reasons kids use, and not all of them are to get high with a substance.
Right.
Many times it's to use to belong, or to use to feel more comfortable in one's own skin, or to use to risk take or experience something new. And there are a lot of ways that kids can do all of those things that make sense for them and their stage of life without alcohol or another drug. So under the social norms approach, we might ask as parents, what do our kids actually want, and how can we help to provide structures, opportunities for them where they do get to make friends, explore their world, explore their identity, keep them really busy with healthy highs that don't include alcohol or another drug, whether that's sports or travel or the opportunity to build relationships in their community. So that's another big piece of the puzzle is, do kids want to use, or are they seeking something that's natural in an unnatural way because society has given them the message that it's an easy out? What if we make it easy for them to build relationships, have fun, and explore who they are without all of that? Then we might be having a totally different conversation.
What is your daily routine at your workplace? What are you normally engaged in? What are you putting together for the kids?
Yeah, well, we tailor our programs across the world. So we work in communities, oftentimes schools or with community coalitions, where their needs are slightly different, maybe different ages. So age-appropriate conversations about how do we work with middle schoolers, elementary schoolers, high school students in different ways, schools of different sizes. So oftentimes we're brainstorming how to get an evidence-based effective message and skill opportunities out to kids through our cadre of prevention specialists who go out into communities and deliver this work with the communities we have there. So it's often you know, what's next for this community? How can we build upon their success in reducing use here? Or how can we get into a whole new community, maybe somewhere in the world we've never been, and make them feel really comfortable with the services that we have to offer too. So it's constantly being creative and yet holding to the health message. How can we deliver this message in a way that partners with the communities we're in, but keeps the fidelity to health always? What would you say a typical day is like?
I think that's exactly right. There is no one typical way, but what we find, again, and I alluded to it before, kids love to talk about this. When we do a survey and we poll the student community, they cannot wait to see their own data.
Okay.
They love their own numbers. They'll be, 87% of you have never had a whole drink in your life. They're like, see, I told you. And they love hearing about healthy choices they're making, their health and wellness, the fact that their school community cares about them. So fostering the climate of health and wellness and teaching them how to have conversations with each other is a really valuable skill that we go in and help school communities develop. We're there for a week, we leave. We don't want the conversation to end. We want them to be able to continue to talk to each other about healthy decisions and health and wellness around substance, especially as it relates to later adolescence, upper school or high school.
Beautiful. Well, that seems like we have reached the end of our program. That 30 minutes flew pretty fast, right?
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, so once again, I want to say thank you very much, Kirsten, Executive Director from FCD Prevention Works, and also Program Manager Desiree Vanquez. Thank you for joining today. And for all those who are watching, I want to thank you. And until then, goodbye. Yeah.
Imagine a time when no one person has brain disease. Imagine a time when no one person has Parkinson's disease. Or no one person has MS. No one person is debilitated by a stroke. And no family suffers the tragedy of Alzheimer's. Some of the best minds in America are doing more than imagining. The American Brain Foundation is seeking to find cures, where life without brain disease isn't just something we can imagine, it's something we can know. Help us get there.
Welcome to Understood.org, a free online resource for parents of kids with learning and attention issues, with personalized recommendations, tools, and expert advice.
Our family is no less than any other family.
My heart doesn't see race.
Love is love.